Hi. Sorry for the poor production values and the fact that I'm going to read like a banshee, but I'm responding to over 2,000 comments, so I got a lot to cover. Believe it or not, I'd anticipated each of those critiques. I just couldn't fit all that into a 9.5-minute video. I know that sounds kind of condescending and douchey, but it's just that I'm a nerd about this stuff, and I've spent a lot of time thinking and reading about it. And I've done this debate already in my head literally hundreds of times. Sometimes I even win. One of the main criticisms was that I'd oversimplified. Now the problem is, in life, things are either simple or they're complex. Wait, that's oversimplified. Things fall somewhere in the spectrum between simple and complex. So here's our problem, you and I. Here's surfing the web, and here's global climate change. And here's how we get from one to the other. I've got just a few minutes to catch your attention, so I say, hey, look at this! And then you say, that's oversimplified. You missed a spot. I'm out of here. And then I say, wait, I know, fill it in yourself. And then you say, well, that's just Pascal's wager anyway. I'm out of here. And then I say, wait, it only looks like Pascal's wager because they're both decision grids. This one isn't sunk by the infinities his have. And then you say, well, your argument could be used for any threat, like a flying spaghetti monster. That's just ridiculous. I'm out of here. And then I say, wait, you're right. What we really need to do is assign some probabilities here. And then you say, fine. Top row, 99%, bottom row, 1%. And then I say, wait, I disagree. And then you say, well, then where are we going to get those probabilities? I'm not buying yours because you're a dork. And then I say, hey, let's be civil. And then we have a long discussion about criteria for estimating probabilities. And after massive bruising negotiations, we agree on some ranges. And then I say, okay, now let's assign some numerical measure of desirability for each box. And then you say, crap! And then we have another frank and long discussion about and agree on some rough numbers. And then I say, okay, let's take the expected value of this puppy so we can agree on the best bet. And then by that time, you haven't even settled half of the last things because way back here, you've gotten distracted by a link in the sidebar with a picture of Mentos or something blowing up or someone in skimpy clothes, or all three. And I admit it, I'd do the same thing if I weren't already a total nerd about this stuff. So what I'm asking you to do is this. Spend a few more minutes of your life exploring the complexities, watching this and following videos. Isn't an issue this important worth a few minutes? Trying to strike a balance, I'm going to give you just a 1 or 2 line response for each of the main critiques so we can get one step closer towards the complex. So I am not being dismissive of any arguments, I'm just being necessarily brief. If that brevity doesn't do it for you, please leave a comment with a request for more detail on the YouTube page, and I'll elaborate more in a later video. Here we go. Objection. That's just Pascal's wager. You can't put lipstick on that pig. My response, it looks like Pascal's wager because they're both basic decision grids. What sunk his was infinite payoffs and assumptions without evidence. This one has finite payoffs and assumptions based on evidence. Objection. That grid could be used to conclude that action is required on every single threat, no matter how outlandish. Thus, if we buy the grid, then we go bankrupt, preventing every possible contingency. My response, you're totally right. That's why, to be useful, we need to get down and dirty and assign some probabilities here, which I guess I didn't imply strongly enough last time, as well as some numerical measure of desirability for each grid. Then you can do a trick called the expected value from probability theory and actually calculate which column is most desirable. This is how casinos and insurance companies can pay out huge amounts of money based on unpredictable events and still be confident they'll make a profit. So it all comes down to assigning those numbers. We'll address that in a minute. Objection. There are so many problems, but only finite resources. Why start with climate change? My response? I had a professor of chemistry, oceanography, and atmospheric sciences, all one guy, who put it this way. Paper or plastic? Doesn't matter. Save the whales? Doesn't matter. Toxic waste? Save Social Security? Pro-life or pro-choice? Doesn't matter. If the worst of the potential consequences of global climate change come to pass, it will so dominate us as a species that every other conceivable issue will seem insignificant. It would be like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Which brings us to our next objection. Objection. The consequences in the lower right-hand corner are way overblown. My response? They aren't the most likely scenarios, but they are discussed seriously and increasingly in the scientific community, including in the Pentagon in a 2004 report on climate change as a threat to national security. To give you just a flavor why, think about the feedback when you put a microphone in front of its own speaker. The smallest tap rapidly turns into a runaway screech because the output of the system feeds back into the input. There are a host of such systems in the climate. Here's just a couple. Carbon dioxide traps some of the sun's energy. If something heats up the ocean just a little, it releases carbon dioxide that was dissolved into the atmosphere. The released CO2 traps more heat, heating the ocean further, releasing more CO2, heating the ocean even more, and so on. Or, heating the ocean melts some of the methane hydrates frozen at the bottom, releasing methane into the atmosphere, trapping more heat, heating the ocean further, releasing even more methane, heating the oceans further, and so on. There are a bunch of others. Pile those all up and presto, drastic and abrupt climate change is very feasible. Objection. What about China and the rest of the third world? What good will it do if the US takes action and they don't? My response? Lots. With only 5% of the world's population, we in the US produce 25% of its CO2 emissions. We're a big chunk of the problem. Worried they'll leapfrog us? We sell the clean technology to them. Plus, this isn't necessarily an all or nothing. There are probably intermediate conditions, and any action would probably improve the outcome. Objection. Who's to say a little warming is a bad thing? Sometimes I feel kind of cold. My response? The climate is tremendously complex. It's more accurate to think of global warming as global climate change, and even more descriptive to think of it as global climate destabilization. Who's to say a light tap on the chest is a bad thing? It's not, unless you happen to be standing on top of a post. Objection. It's not that simple. What about the intermediaries between no action and all-out action? What if climate change is happening, but we're not the ones doing it? What if climate change is happening and we're the ones doing it, but our actions won't stop it, or they make it worse? What if the depression in this box were way worse than just a loss of jobs? Didn't the Great Depression lead to Hitler? Couldn't another one lead to nuclear war or the dissolution of America? And if we accept that this hypothetical depression would be caused by the action in this column, shouldn't it appear in this box too? My response? I tried to encourage you to play with the complexities yourself, but let's go ahead and play together. So really, our grid should look like this. Holy shit, it exploded! So we've got 5 columns across the top representing 5 different degrees of action, from all out to status quo. Down the side, GCC stands for global climate change, the A stands for anthropogenic, which is just a climate change lingo for human caused, and we've got all the different combinations of whether climate change is true or not, whether it's anthropogenic or not, and whether our action has positive, negative, or no result on the environment. Into each of these 40 boxes, we put our different economic, environmental, social, political, and public health scenarios, including all the questions about a potential depression. And then we assign to each box a number to represent its payoff or cost. Then we assign a probability for each row. And finally, we use those numbers to calculate the expected value to give an indication of which column is our best bet. Okay, ready? Just kidding, there's no way I'm qualified to do this, and neither probably are you. Here's a suggestion. Why don't we hire a bunch of really smart people who know their stuff to do it for us and get back to us ASAP? You wouldn't remove your own appendix, you wouldn't try your own lawsuit, you'd hire really good professionals. So for Pete's sake, why are Joe schmucks like you and me still debating the finer points of climate science? We'll get back to that in a minute, because I don't want you to think that's a total cop-out. Here's my best guess to the concerns about the depression over here. First, I think the feasibility of our action causing a global depression is very questionable for the following reasons. A. Was it the runaway government spending that caused the Great Depression of the 1930s? I'm no student of history, but wasn't there something about a stock market running away with optimism? B. Wasn't there also something about huge government spending that actually helped bring us out of it? And C. Here we can be very deliberate and controlled about our actions, minimizing any destabilization. Second, if we did get a global depression, there could conceivably be serious problems besides economic ones up here. But if planned, controlled spending here sparked a worldwide depression, then panicked last-minute spending in a crisis down here would almost certainly do the same down here. So down here we'd have all of these problems compounded by tremendous natural disasters in a destabilized climate. Third, shouldn't this depression show up down here too? Like I said, I don't think there's much evidence that it's feasible at all. To further decrease its feasibility down here, I'd argue that much of the dynamics of an economy is based on human psychology. If you question that, just listen to any daily report about how the market reacted that day. And since in this box, the spending and regulation would be perceived as justified and good, it decreases the likelihood that it would have a hugely negative impact. In fact, a strong argument can be made that innovation leads to a stronger economy. So, back to the idea of hiring all those smart people to do this grid for us, how do we know that it's worth giving all those eggheads all our hard-earned tax money? The way I do it is to look at non-advocacy professional associations that don't have a huge vested interest, like the National Academy of Sciences, or AAAS, which publishes Science Magazine, the gold standard of scientific journals. Both organizations recently released official, strongly worded statements about the necessity to address climate change. The one from AAAS started, "The scientific evidence is clear. Global climate change caused by human activities is occurring now, and it is a growing threat to society." And it ends, "The growing torrent of information presents a clear message. We are already experiencing global climate change. It is time to muster the political will for concerted action. The time is now." Wait a minute, was that the Sierra Club? No, it's perhaps the most respected scientific organization in the world. Man, if that doesn't sound like a conclusion, what would? So, back to our probabilities. If you look at what the scientific community is saying, and not just individual scientists, it makes a very strong case that these rows are much, much more likely than these rows. So I'd say, yeah, we need to act. In fact, we need to get all of our top people on this right away. I'm talking a project on the scale of the Manhattan Project and the Apollo Project put together. We've got a good start on the technology already. We can do this. And here's the bonus. The sooner we act, the smarter we can be about it. And so there's a good chance we can make drastic reductions in CO2 emissions without drastic reductions in standard of living. But the longer we wait, the less likely that becomes. I'm reminded of what the guy in charge of trash disposal in New York City said about the landfill crisis a while back. He was arguing for proactive action, and he said, "The problem will be solved. We can either do it now, or we can do it in 20 years down the road in a panic at 20 times the cost and 20 times the environmental damage. But it will get solved." I hope I tied up all the loose ends. If you want more details on a specific topic, please tell me and I'll try to respond. I'd be happy to talk more about why you and I don't even need to try to figure out whether all those counter-arguments are true or not. The ones about solar activity, warming on other planets, natural cycles, cosmic rays, and proxy data. So let me know what you want to hear. Politely. Remember when everyone tore into the FBI because it turns out they had enough information to stop the September 11th attacks, but they just didn't connect the dots at the time? The dots that were so easy for us to connect in hindsight? I think about that a lot now with climate change. Why don't we see if the dots connect now instead of waiting for hindsight? Don't we deserve that much? We can do this. Pass it on. It's high time this avalanche came rumbling down.